My fiancée secretly invited her ex to our wedding. By the end of the reception, half the guests had walked out. 6 months before our wedding, my fiancée, Melissa, promised me there was absolutely nothing left between her and her ex-boyfriend, Aaron. They dated years earlier, stayed friendly after the breakup, and occasionally exchanged birthday messages. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I trusted her because she'd never given me a reason not to. We spent over a year planning our wedding, paid for almost everything ourselves, and kept the guest list intentionally small because we wanted every person there to genuinely support our relationship. Every invitation was supposed to be something we agreed on together. At least that's what I believed. The ceremony went exactly as we dreamed. Our families cried. Our friends cheered. The photographer kept saying we looked like the happiest couple he'd seen all season. Then during cocktail hour, I noticed a man I didn't recognize hugging Melissa a little longer than everyone else. She looked uncomfortable when she introduced him. "This is Aaron," she said quietly. My stomach dropped. I pulled her aside and asked why he was standing at our wedding. After a long pause, she admitted she'd invited him a few weeks earlier because she didn't want to hurt his feelings by leaving him out. She never told me because she already knew I'd say no. I was furious, but I convinced myself we'd deal with it after the reception. I refused to let one guest ruin a day we'd spent so long planning. That plan lasted less than an hour. During dinner, Aaron suddenly stood up with a glass in his hand and started giving an unsolicited speech. At first, everyone assumed he'd been asked to say a few words. Then he started laughing about how Melissa used to call him her soulmate in college and joked that he'd always wondered if she'd eventually realize she'd chosen the wrong man. A few guests laughed awkwardly, thinking it was some kind of strange joke. I looked at Melissa, expecting her to stop him immediately. She didn't. She just stared down at her plate. Then Aaron reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an old framed photo of the two of them together from years earlier. Holding it up for everyone to see, he smiled and said, "I figured I'd return this now that you're officially someone else's problem." The room went completely silent. Melissa finally stood up and told him to leave. Instead of walking away, he looked directly at her and said, "You invited me. You told me we'd always matter to each other." Every head in the room turned toward Melissa. She looked completely frozen. A couple of her bridesmaids quietly admitted they'd known. Aaron had been invited, but assumed I'd approved it because they couldn't imagine she'd keep something like that from her own fiancé. I hadn't. The wedding coordinator and two of my cousins eventually escorted Aaron outside, but the damage had already been done. Half the reception spent the rest of the evening whispering instead of celebrating. My parents tried to keep the mood alive, but people started leaving early. We never cut the cake. We skipped our first dance. The DJ packed up almost an hour before he was scheduled to finish because the dance floor stayed empty. The next morning, Melissa apologized through tears. She admitted she'd invited Aaron because she still carried guilt over how their relationship ended years earlier. She honestly believed seeing her get married would finally give him closure and prove they could remain mature adults. Instead, she'd handed him the perfect opportunity to embarrass both of us in front of every important person in our lives. We postponed our honeymoon, not because we couldn't afford to go, because we both knew pretending nothing had happened would have been even worse. It took months of counseling before we slowly rebuilt the trust that had been broken by one secret invitation. Looking back, I realized the biggest mistake wasn't inviting an ex to the wedding. It was making a decision that affected both of us, while hiding it from the person she was about to spend the rest of her life with. A marriage rarely falls apart because of one guest. It falls apart when honesty never receives an invitation in the first place. If you were in my position, would you have stayed and worked through it, or ended the marriage before it truly began? Yes or no?